Chapter 21. Alarming Rescue. Tom stood holding the gun in his pocket, facing the door, still wearing the hat and overcoat. He wasn't sure if he should knock or shoot his way in. He'd never done anything so violent before. He hesitated, keeping his head down in case there were any cameras. After another second, he heard the loud buzzing of the fire alarm. People started streaming out of several doors on the hallway, bustling to the stairs. Tom lingered to see if anyone would emerge from 825. He plastered his body against the wall of the hallway and waited. When the kidnapper opened the door to peek out, Tom hit him in the face with the back of his gun and pulled him forward. Tom pointed the gun to the man's head and led him back inside the room. Roxanne jumped up, elated her plan had worked. With her hands still tied, though, she didn't think she'd be much help. Seeing Tom march in with the kidnapper, the bald man jumped off the bed and brandished his own gun, which he pointed at Roxanne. "Go ahead and shoot him," the bald man said to Tom, "and then your girlfriend is toast." Roxanne's jubilation evaporated once she found herself standing with a gun to her head. Luckily for Tom and Roxanne, the other goon was unarmed, presumably just the muscle for the job. He stood at the head of the bed with his hands up. "Let her go," Tom said to the bald man. "Or what?" said the bald man in return. "Real childish," Roxanne rolled her eyes. "Shut up," said the bald man, keeping the gun trained on Roxanne's temple. "Or what?" she said sarcastically. "Or I'll shoot you," he said. She thought about what she could do to distract him, give Tom an easier shot. Thankful they'd at least done a little target practice, she considered trying to signal to Tom that the bald man needed to be his new mark. "I'm pretty sure the boss wouldn't like that. How about this instead? You let me go and we all live," she said. "Boss wouldn't like that either," said the goon by the bed. "Look, the boss wants Tom and I alive so we can pay him, right? The way I see it, you'll be in big trouble if you kill us right now." Roxanne thought if she kept talking, maybe some idea would pop into her head. "I don't think you know how the boss works," said the bald man. "Then just call him," Roxanne said. While the bald man reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone to look at the screen, Roxanne made eye contact with Tom, tilting her head toward the bald man, trying to indicate Tom should shoot. She couldn't believe the bald man actually listened to her. If Tom wasn't going to shoot, Roxanne considered trying to kick the gun out of the bald man's hand, but she knew that was a long shot. Tom turned his gun and took a shot, missing the man but breaking the glass window behind them, glass shattering inside and out. Roxanne, eager to use her kickboxing skills, stepped up on the chair and jumped, kicking both legs hard into the bald guy's chest. She fell to the ground as the man stumbled backward, landing on a pile of shards. He winced in pain, the gun having fallen just out of his reach. Tom fixed his gun back on the goon, but the other kidnapper tried to climb over the bed to get to the bald man's dropped gun. Roxanne clambered to her feet and retrieved the gun before he got there, holding it in her tied-together hands. Roxanne lifted her arms, outstretched and holding the gun, pointing it from one man to the other. "We're going to go," she said. She stepped backward 1 foot at a time, training the gun on the men. When she almost reached the door, she veered away from the goon Tom was pointing a gun at and Tom opened the door. They dashed out. "Come on," Roxanne said, running toward the stairs. "We have to go. Put the gun in your pocket." Before they entered the stairwell, Tom untied her hands. His touch brushing against her hand zapped her with a vibrant jolt. Despite her ordeal, her face radiated at Tom. She'd needed a savior after all, and Tom came through for her. "I told you I can't aim," he said, disappointed. "That's okay. You didn't hit the bullseye, but you hit an outside target. Maybe not the big prize, but enough to win a keychain." She grinned at him. Thanks to the fire alarm, the hallway was empty by that time, but there remained a few stragglers on the stairs. They stepped into the lobby filled with hundreds of other guests and sauntered toward the doors. They walked away from the hotel, looking back to make sure the goons weren't following them. A minute later, Roxanne's dad drove up. "Dad," Roxanne said. "Hop in, I'll explain later," he said. Nestled together in the back seat, Tom hugged Roxanne. She finally felt safe again after her scary night. They passed a fire truck going in the direction of the hotel. "Don't worry. I let my old buddy, Grant, at the fire department know I pulled the fire alarm by mistake. I did some construction work at the station years back," her father said. "It was you," Tom said in surprise. "What did you think I was going to do? Just leave her in there? I don't know what was taking you so long, but I had to act to save my little girl." "Thanks, Dad. I was hoping Tom would get the ping and do something. Having you on my side is an extra bonus. I've been circling around trying to find you," her dad said. If you hadn't come out when you did, I was going to send Grant through the hotel to bust every door. My bad luck with shoes continues. Roxanne picked up her leg and wiggled her toes in her socks. But at least I've got the two best heroes in Memphis. Tom looked at Roxanne and they chuckled together. Chapter 22, Bedroom Bullseye. Tom insisted on taking Roxanne to his house, claiming he had top-notch security. He also offered to let her father stay, thinking the loan shark and his men might come after him now that Roxanne and Tom had gotten away. Roxanne's father declined, claiming he knew a place where he could stay, convincing them he'd be okay. Driving up to a black iron gate, Tom gave him a code and the gate slowly swung open. Roxanne's father dropped them off in front of Tom's place, a stately stone home set back from the road. While it wasn't quite a mansion, it certainly looked too big for one person. Thanks, Dad, Roxanne said as she climbed out of the car. She walked over to his open window and gave him a kiss on the cheek. I'm so glad you came. He forced himself to smile, pain lingering on his face. Take your gun, she handed it him, and he put it back in the glove compartment. It's all my fault. He tried not to tear up in front of her. You never should have been in that position. If I hadn't gambled all that money. Dad, stop. It's not all your fault. We all make mistakes. I know you've got my back. She tried to reassure him. He nodded, then looked at Tom. Take care of her, he said. I know, or else, Tom replied. He draped his arm around Roxanne and led her into the house. Almost immediately when they entered, Tom typed in the security code to turn off the alarm. Then he stepped into an office to call someone, probably one of his employees, thought Roxanne, to check the security footage. He wanted to make sure no one had been lurking around in the past 2 weeks. His body stayed rigid as he took care of business, indicating to Roxanne with his finger that he'd be just 1 minute, and he turned away. While Tom made his calls, Roxanne ambled around, looking at the dining room, the kitchen with large island, and the living room with a sizable fireplace. She laid on the outsized beige sectional that filled the room, stretching out her legs. After such an eventful night, she felt exhausted. Tom came in just as Roxanne started to doze off. Oh, sorry to wake you. I think you'll be more comfortable in the guest room though. She nodded, her eyes a little groggy. In one fluid motion, Tom leaned over and scooped up Roxanne's body. She circled her arms around him, pressing her chest to his. She could smell his cologne. The smooth scent invigorated her a little. He carried her into a room with a queen bed, simply decorated in cream and light blue. Tom placed her on the bed, resting her head against the blue-striped decorative pillows. Roxanne held on to Tom for another moment, keeping him close to her. With their faces inches apart, Roxanne's eyes half closed. She could feel his breath on her like an ocean breeze. She leaned forward and pressed her lips against his, pulling his head closer. Tom returned her kiss, their tongues caressing each other's mouths. After a minute, Tom pulled away and stood up. I'll let you rest, he said. Awakened by her passion for Tom, Roxanne sat up. She grabbed his hand. No, she said and pulled him toward him. Kneeling on the bed, she kissed him again, more fervent than before. Tom returned her enthusiasm and rubbed Roxanne's back as they smacked lips. He ran his hand up the back of her shirt, sending an electric pulse up her spine. Still on her knees, she pulled off Tom's shirt. His lanky body, taut and firm, excited her. He unhooked her bra and brought her shirt over her head. They continued to kiss as Tom pushed Roxanne back on the bed. He kissed her left breast, then her right, his soft lips arousing her. His movements were both gentle and fluid, unlike the stiff, robotic movements she was used to seeing from Tom. She hugged his back and pressed his body into hers, wanting to feel his curves and muscles. She gazed in his eyes and kissed him once softly, then again ardently, her yearning for him growing. I thought I might never see you again, he whispered in her ear. And I realized I couldn't live without you. He kissed her hard, his face and body entwining with hers. She returned his passion, her hips pressing up into his manliness. Roxanne unbuttoned his pants and he shimmied them off. She too had been scared that the kidnapping would keep her apart from Tom. His heroic rescue proved how much he really cared about her. Tom rolled onto his side, allowing Roxanne to pull off her pants. He kissed her delicately on the neck and continued down to her breasts. Her nipples hardened at his touch, and she could feel the moistness between her legs. She pulled him on top, guiding him inside her. Together they pulsed, fluid like ocean waves. While fear had clutched her earlier in the evening, it was replaced with passion. Her eagerness to merge with Tom brought Roxanne closer to climax. She gripped the bedspread as Tom continued to rock in and out, his movements and groans growing more vigorous. Wrapping her legs around his back, she squeezed, not wanting to let go. Not wanting to feel as scared and alone as she had earlier that night. She peeked, and a moment later he shuddered, both of them getting their fill of intense pleasure. Tom rolled over onto his back, laying straight as a pool cue. Roxanne reached her fingers to his face and stroked his cheek. He pressed his palm against her hand and looked in her eyes. "I'm just so glad you're here," he said. He kissed her hand and she retracted it. "At least I got you to loosen up a little," she said. He smiled and his expression made her feel like she'd hit the bullseye and won the biggest prize at the fair. Chapter 23. Back to business. The next morning, Roxanne awoke to Tom leaning over her and nuzzling her ear. She liked seeing a playful side of him. Turning her head, she kissed him sweetly on the lips and rubbed his nose with hers. "We still have some things to discuss." He stood up beside the bed. Having already gotten dressed in black pants and a maroon polo, he looked ready for business. Of course, thought Roxanne. There was a whole load of information to unpack, but she wanted to stay in the comfy, cozy confines of the bed a little longer. It felt safe and warm, and she particularly didn't want to have to divulge to Tom all her wrongdoings like the forged permit. "Coffee first," she said. "I got that covered. First, get dressed. Then you can have some coffee in the kitchen." He walked out. She smirked. Despite their passionate night together, Tom still didn't know the best way to interact with a woman. Sometimes he was too abrupt. Roxanne dressed herself in her clothes from the night before and scuttled to the kitchen where Tom was waiting with a mug for each of them. She sat down on a stool at the island counter and took a sip. "Hot and strong?" "Milk?" she asked. Even his coffee was bold and sharp, in need of a little creaminess. He opened the refrigerator and removed a small carton, turned, and then poured a modest stream in her mug, each movement crisp and pointed. She blew on the contents to cool it and took a sip. The coffee warmed and energized her, but not as much as Tom had the night before. She thought about his body on hers, finding it hard to see Tom's brusque movements as belonging to the same person who conformed to her body so well when they made love. Tom stood across from her. "What did those guys want?" he asked, jumping right into talking about the kidnapping. "Money," Roxanne said. "I gathered that, but why? Do you have anything to eat?" Roxanne got off the stool and walked over to the fridge, near where Tom was standing. She smirked at him as she opened the door and peered in. Grabbing a yogurt, she turned and smiled at Tom. "Spoon." He sighed and grabbed one from a drawer. "Sworry," she said, gulping down a spoonful. "I didn't even get any of that pizza I bought last night. They were going to feed it to me when someone so rudely barged in." She made a face at Tom. He didn't even crack a smile. "Roxanne, we need to be serious." "Okay, this is good." She took another bite. In actuality, she was stalling. She didn't want to have to admit to Tom that she'd forged the permit and not told him. "I think I owe you an apology." Tom's face looked sullen. Roxanne sat back on the stool, surprised. He'd been the hero. Why was he apologizing? "I should have taken the stolen permit more seriously. I just thought I could find out who took it, and if not, bribe someone to take care of it. It turned out harder than I expected." He frowned. "What do you mean, bribe someone? Who did you talk to?" she asked. "I had some people ask around. I figured I'd leave Baxter out of it, but I couldn't find the information without divulging too much of my own." Roxanne nodded, thinking about how she couldn't let Tom blame himself. "I should have tried harder. I'm sorry." Then they came in. She could see the emotion in his face. She swallowed a spoonful of yogurt, overcome by his obvious concern for her. "That would have helped." "Sure." She waved the spoon in the air. "But I had Owen hold off the loan sharks, give us more time to work on the permit. Then the pregnancy test and..." "And what?" Tom eyed her suspiciously. "I got nervous that since I wasn't pregnant, you weren't going to help with the permit. And seeing Baxter, well, I couldn't go back to him. Besides, he didn't know it was stolen, so I..." She made a cringy face, bracing to let out the truth. "You what?" "I forged Baxter's signature and filed the permit. I thought no one would know. But then one of those goons said the deal was off once I filed the forged permit. I don't know how they knew." "Roxanne, you did what? You can't do that. It could ruin your career." He looked angry. "I know." She dropped her head. When she raised her eyes again, she gave him a pouty face, looking vulnerable. "I was depressed and desperate. Owen died, and he was the only one who seemed to be helping, and then with no baby I just freaked." "Okay." She started to sob, her shoulders bobbing up and down. Tom hugged her, rubbing her back for comfort. "I told you I don't need a baby. I'll find another way. It's you I'm worried about." She sniffled and wiped her eyes. She kissed him long and soft. "Thank you." Anything else? He asked. She wagged her finger at the memory. Yeah, actually. Owen sent me to this abandoned building a while back. She hopped down off the stool again and retrieved her purse. Removing the piece of aluminum from her wallet, she showed Tom. I found this there. Then in the hotel room, one of the kidnappers grabbed a beer from the fridge. It had this same logo. Tom took the piece of aluminum and turned it in his fingers, studying it with each jerky movement of his hand. Can I hold on to this? I want to look into it further. Yeah, sure, she said. I'm sorry, by the way. She dropped her eyes. I should be mad at you. All that talk about me not telling you things. Tom sucked in a deep breath, his voice growing louder. And then you didn't trust me. I know, she said. I was wrong. I realize that now. She pulled his shirt, making him take a step toward her. I'm sorry. She ran her hands up his shirt, smiling coyly at Tom's grumpy face. They're still going to come after you, you know? Roxanne said, feeling his abs and then his pecs. I guess we'll just have to find the answers before they. She kissed him, preventing his last words. We better get to work, he said in a businesslike tone, staring into her eyes and stepping back. She thought his serious side looked sexy, Tom trying to focus, but she wanted to ruffle his feathers first. I guess I'll need some business clothes then. She started to take off her top. Tom stared at her, Roxanne in her bra, her breasts peeking out of the lacy cups. Tom hesitated, then tilted his head a little as if in thought. She noticed the bulge in his pants, and she knew she'd excited him. I think we have some business to attend to here, she said. She pushed down her pants and stepped out of them. Tom watched her silently. Seeing her standing against the counter in her lacy pink bra and underwear, Tom rushed over as if in a race. He pushed his body against hers and started kissing her mouth and neck. After sliding her panties down, he propped her up on the countertop. He undid his pants and pulled them around his thighs. Then he entered her, thrusting against the counter as she wrapped her legs around his back. Roxanne pressed his head to her chest, rubbing his hair between her breasts. He came quickly and then bent down to lick Roxanne's button, giving her the pleasure she had been seeking since seeing him in his business attire that morning. After their lust-filled moment was over, Roxanne looked at Tom. It was nice doing business with you. She laughed. Tom smirked. Hearing his phone, he pulled up his pants quickly and looked at a text. It's them, he said. They want to talk. And just as quick as it left, Tom's seriousness returned. Chapter 24. Baby Bliss. After a couple of phone calls, Tom drove Roxanne home to get her clothes. He insisted she wasn't safe and needed to stay with him for a while. She didn't want to disagree. Tom said he had someone trying to trace the text, find out what could be done. Don't just pay off the debt. I know you want to. You think that will solve everything, Roxanne said, trying to fold things neatly into a duffel bag, becoming frustrated that the clothes wouldn't lay nicely in the bag and instead looked like a crumpled mess. Tom shrugged. Won't it? Haven't we seen enough? I don't want them to kidnap you again or worse. He grabbed one of her shirts she had failed to properly fold and crisply created creases on both sides, doubled it over, and handed it back to Roxanne. I know, it's just I need more information. Like, how did they know about the permit? What is with that building Owen sent me to and the beer can? And those men burning something at that other property, don't you think it's all connected? She carefully placed the shirt Tom handed her into the bag, then threw a handful of socks on top and tried to zip the bag. Roxanne, we have to stop. It keeps getting worse. You're right. I think we just need to go back to normal. I go to work. You do your thing. We meet at night. She threw the bag over her shoulder, its heavy contents sinking her shoulder. What does that solve? Tom grabbed the bag and handled it with ease. Nothing, I guess, but maybe there's some way we can stall so I can figure this out before you have to pay those goons. I think there's more to it than just my dad's loan. And if you pay them now, they could keep coming back. Tom looked at her, the muscles around his forehead tightening, showing he was considering what Roxanne just said. He placed the bag on the floor, his brows knitted. Roxanne snapped her fingers, startling Tom's moment of contemplation. The heiress. Tell them you'll cut them in the deal. Roxanne turned to rifle through her closet for some shoes. Tom picked up a sneaker, then a black stiletto that Roxanne threw out of the closet. Roxanne, I don't know if that deal is going to go through. He held the stiletto in his hand, examining it. Because you need a baby? Roxanne's head was still in the closet. Well, yeah, he said, continuing to turn the shoe in his hand. I'm sure you can convince Ruby. Or I will. I mean, it's real now, isn't it? She looked up at Tom, hopeful, the other stiletto in her hand. He smiled. It is. He kissed her. So then we tell her I'm pregnant. Speed things along. Roxanne started dumping some shoes in another duffel. Don't you think your lies are getting out of control? He handed her the stiletto. Pack that, he said and smiled. When it comes to you, I'm willing to lie. She smiled coyly, placing the shoes in the bag. For the next 2 weeks, Tom and Roxanne went back to work. Tom had his finance guy draft a proposal for Ruby and one for the loan shark. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, trying to put off some bad guys and at the same time realize his real estate goals. He thought he might be able to convince the loan sharks because he was promising a large long-term stream of legitimate income that he believed they might be interested in. As for Ruby, Tom hoped he and Roxanne could fit the profile she was looking for, baby or not. Protective of Roxanne, Tom paid a bodyguard to drive Roxanne to and from work, as well as sit at the construction site. He also invested some security measures in making sure Roxanne's father stayed safe, including a surveillance system. One evening after work, once the bodyguards delivered Roxanne safely back to Tom's, he offered to cook dinner. Watching him from a stool at the island, Roxanne sniffed the onions and peppers he was cooking in a pan and wrinkled her nose in disgust. Ew, she said. I thought you liked peppers and onions? I'm making steak. I do, it's just. I don't know. She sniffed the air again. It's sickening. Are you feeling okay? He stirred the vegetables in the pan and turned toward her. I feel okay. A little bloated. And my nipples hurt. She adjusted the cups of her bra. She looked at Tom wide-eyed. He went back to sautéing. Can your bodyguard get me something? She asked. What is it? Maybe I already have it. Roxanne gave a sly smile. I'm sure you don't. Tom looked perplexed. It's a woman thing. She nodded. Sure. Just tell me. No, I'll let him know myself. He handed her his phone so she could text her request. While waiting for the bodyguard to return with her item, Roxanne went to the guest suite where she stored her stuff, even though she'd spent every night with Tom in his bed, and tried to get away from the smell. If her instincts were correct, her plan would fall into place, but she didn't want to get Tom's hopes up again. She tried to read a magazine and couldn't concentrate. She painted her toenails instead, anxiously awaiting the bodyguard's return. When she heard the doorbell, she scampered to the door, being careful not to smudge her toes, before Tom could pop out of the kitchen. She opened it and snatched the bag from the bodyguard, calling, "Thank you," as she walked on her heels as quickly as she could back to the guest suite. Ripping open the box with her teeth, she didn't want to waste another minute. It felt different than the time before. The last pregnancy test, she was shadowed by worry and doubt. Now she knew how she felt about Tom, and despite it being early in their relationship, they'd already experienced quite a few emotional events together. A baby would be a happy development. As Roxanne sat on the toilet, Tom knocked on the door of the bathroom. Everything all right in there? He asked. Yep, like I said, woman thing. She yelled through the door. Well, dinner's ready. I'll be there in a few minutes. Roxanne finished with the stick and placed it on the counter. She tried not to look. Having patience wasn't one of her stronger attributes. After trying to remember the lyrics to an old rock song, singing a few phrases at a stretch in order to pass the time, she looked at the stick. The pink plus sign sparkled at her. She picked it up and brought it closer to her eyes just to make sure. She danced a little jig, shaking her hips. Now her plan could work. Tom could get his development deal, they could pay off the loan shark and be a happy family. Dancing into the dining room where Tom had set the table with cloth napkins and candles, further proof of his rigid formality, Tom stood up in a snappish movement. She grabbed his hand and started gyrating with him, singing a few lines from the song she had been thinking about. Tom obliged and swayed his hips with hers. She brought her face to his and kissed him. Holding his head close to hers, she said, I'm pregnant. Tom opened his eyes wider and shook his head. Really? Are you sure? Pretty sure, she said. I mean, I know but I didn't think. Yeah, apparently, 2 people can have a baby the old-fashioned way. He smiled and swung her around. They laughed and he kissed her passionately, dipping her over his knee. Normally people like to date longer, I guess, but after all we've been through, I think this is something of a relief, she said as he righted her. This is great news, he beamed. Their excitement, however, was interrupted by a knock at the door. 2 policemen stood in the large stone entryway outside. Their baby bliss was about to be extinguished. Chapter 25 Arrested Relay. Tom answered the door, standing straight and imposing. Hello, officers, he said. What can I do for you? 2 male police officers in uniform stood at the door, one middle-aged and short with a protruding belly, the other young and lanky. We're here for Roxanne Gary, one of them said. Standing to the side of the door, Roxanne knew the officers had probably already seen her through the large picture window at the front of the house. What's it about? Tom continued to stand inflexible, trying to take up as much room in the doorway as he could muster. Sorry. We really need to talk to Roxanne about that, the older officer said. Roxanne wasn't sure why the officers were looking for her. There were a number of reasons: the forged permit, the kidnapping, or even shooting firearms in the woods. She couldn't be sure. Here I am. Roxanne peeked around Tom to reveal herself in the doorway. She knew Tom was trying to protect her, but she could see his grandstanding wasn't getting him anywhere. Tom sighed and waved the officers inside. Roxanne Gary? The younger officer asked. Yes, Roxanne nodded her head. He walked over to her and started to put handcuffs around her wrists. Hey, Tom said. What's this about? Roxanne Gary, you are under arrest for fraud. Whatever you say. The officer finished reciting the Miranda rights and turned to Roxanne. Roxanne looked at Tom, scared and nervous. Roxanne, don't say anything. I can get you a lawyer, Tom instructed her. We were sent because you forged a city commissioner's signature, the cop said, turning to lead her to the door. You weren't supposed to say that, the older cop grumbled to the younger officer. That was me, said Tom. Roxanne looked at him, willing him to make eye contact with her. We have footage of her filing the permit at the county office, the younger cop said. The older police officer rolled his eyes. Save it for the station, Officer Newman. Yeah, she didn't know I forged it, Tom continued. I told her Baxter signed it. It's my fault. Don't arrest her. He told his lie, sounding adamant, looking the cop straight in the eye. He wouldn't glance at Roxanne. The older policeman let out a long breath. I'll have to take you both down to the station, he said in a bored tone. Let's go. He led Roxanne out, still handcuffed, while Tom followed. Don't answer any questions, he whispered. I'll send my lawyer. Roxanne stayed quiet, thinking about how she couldn't let Tom take the fall for her blunder. But when she almost tripped on the curb, she remembered the baby growing inside her. Tom wasn't just trying to spare her, he was thinking of their child. Nearing the police cruiser, Roxanne spotted a man standing outside by his car, about 100 yards away. She squinted, trying to get a better look. The man watched the police load her into the back seat. She kept her gaze on the man as they drove by. He looked at her, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. Roxanne seethed and slumped in her seat. It was Baxter. He must be in on it, she thought. Otherwise, how would he know? She needed some answers. When they arrived at the station, Tom and Roxanne were taken to two separate interview rooms. Roxanne worried about Tom's lie. They were already in so deep, but after seeing Baxter, she knew someone wanted her to suffer. Could he have been behind the kidnapping too? How much did he know? When the police asked her questions, and she refused to answer without a lawyer, they ended the interview. She waited until a smartly dressed woman in her 30s breezed through the interview room. Let me talk to my client. She barely looked at the police officers. Diet soda, please. She nodded at one of the officers. Once they were gone, she said to Roxanne, Don't worry. I have it handled. With her brusque attitude and expensive clothes, Roxanne was glad to have her in her corner. When they come back, I'll do all the talking, she said. Don't you want to? Roxanne started to ask. No, she cut her off. I talk. You're silent. The lawyer sat back and swung her hair into place. The officers shuffled back in and Tom's lawyer waited until they were settled. My client should be released. Tom provided a written and verbal confession that matches the evidence. Roxanne unknowingly filed the forged permit Tom gave her, but that was only after receiving verbal permission from Baxter, one of your city commissioners. And you think Baxter will corroborate that? The cop asked. My client refuses to answer. However, Baxter can verify the details of that day, I'm sure, the lawyer said confidently. The last thing Roxanne wanted was to confront Baxter. She didn't know how the lawyer knew so much. Yet, no one knew exactly what happened that day except Roxanne and Baxter. It was an afternoon she'd rather forget. Verbal confirmation or not, it's still a crime, the police officer said. And you've got the guilty party, Tom. The lawyer picked up her large satchel. If that's all, she looked at one officer then the other. Roxanne and I will be going. The older officer nodded at the younger one, succumbing to defeat, and said, Uncuff her, let her go. Relieved, but also angry at Baxter for getting Tom embroiled in the situation, Roxanne turned to the lawyer after the officers left the room. Thanks, she said. Don't thank me. Tom's the one you owe. She looked Roxanne up and down. Can you get Tom out? Roxanne asked. He'll make bail tomorrow. Roxanne gasped. She didn't want to think about Tom stiffly sitting in a dingy jail cell all night because of her. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll have some investigators on it. We'll see what we can find. She nodded, her face stoic. They started to walk down the hallway of the police station, the lawyer's heels clacking on the tile floor. No one's investigators had been able to figure it out so far. Roxanne wasn't sure she trusted them anymore. The more complex things got, the more she wanted to play detective herself. The baby, however, made that more complicated. Just as she thought maybe she and Tom could have a breather and settle into their relationship, disaster had struck, first the kidnapping, then the arrest. She was grateful for Tom's chivalrous maneuver, but waiting around for answers wasn't working either. Where's the recycling? The lawyer asked, to no one in particular, indicating the empty soda can in her hand. Over there, said a policewoman at her desk and pointed to an open trash can a few yards away. As Roxanne and the lawyer approached the wastebasket, the lawyer tossed in her can, and another empty can sitting on top of some empty plastic water bottles caught Roxanne's eye. A shiny silver can with a green shamrock logo. Roxanne could hardly believe it. While it didn't prove anything, she knew the clue must mean that someone in law enforcement was hiding something. It must be why Owen directed her away from the police. While she couldn't tell Tom, after all, he was in jail because of her, surrounded by the police, she'd have to keep it to herself. Knowing she was so close to figuring out the puzzle vexed her. She walked out of the police station a free woman, but the burden of carrying a child, protecting her lover, and solving a mystery weighed heavily on Roxanne's shoulders. Chapter 27, Party Plan. Busy with party planning, Roxanne tried to forget about the fact that she still owed the loan shark and Tom could still go to prison for her forgery. Because the police and county officials knew about the forged permit, construction on the site had been halted, putting Roxanne and her father in a more precarious position with the loan shark. Tom claimed his team had reached an agreement with the loan shark to forgive the debt if Tom could secure them a stake in his new building venture, which all hinged on Ruby allowing them to buy her land. Therefore, the party was crucial in securing Roxanne's future and her father's safety, putting all other concerns on the back burner until Roxanne could be sure the project would go through. Now that she knew the lengths the bad guys would go to in order to punish her and possibly harm her father, she focused all her energy into making the party a success. Put that table over there, she directed one of the men they contracted to transform the space. Decorating and event management wasn't usually something in which Roxanne excelled, but her organizational skills proved handy in getting the party together in only a few days. She examined the space. It looked beautiful with flowers freshening up the tables and strings of lights making it appear festive. In her basic yellow sundress, she tried her best to look classy and cheerful. The guests started to arrive and mingle. People who lived in the apartments above the stores began to amble in, probably more interested in the free food than anything else, but all glad to see Tom. Through all their turmoil, Roxanne felt relieved she could rely on him. "Ruby," Tom called out as the heiress entered the coffee shop. Being almost a head taller than most of the guests, Tom noticed her entrance first. They kissed each other once on each cheek, and Tom smiled at Ruby. With his tight lips, Roxanne could tell he was making a big effort to turn on the charm. "How are you?" he said. "Good. What's this I hear about you getting arrested?" Tom's eyes clouded for a moment, then he remembered to keep up the facade, and a grin returned to his face. "Oh, that. It's nothing. Just a misunderstanding. My lawyer will sort it out." Ruby nodded. "How did you hear about that?" She laughed and patted his arm. "You know I hear all the gossip." She looked around. "This is cute," she said, nodding. "This was actually my first solo development deal," Tom said. Roxanne watched the exchange from across the room. How Ruby smiled at Tom and he laughed. At one point he tapped her shoulder to direct her gaze across the room. If she didn't know any better, Roxanne might think Tom was hitting on Ruby, and doing a good job of it too. Roxanne decided to intervene, bringing over a wine glass of Chardonnay, Ruby's favorite.
"Y Ruby, Roxana ve amat."
"Here's a drink." She handed the glass to the heiress who smiled. She too wore a light summer dress, looking chic and casual at the same time. "What's this secret reveal you mentioned on the invitation?" Ruby asked, winking at Roxanne. "You'll just have to wait and see." "It's so great you could come," Roxanne said. "I love a good party," Ruby replied and gulped down some wine. "Yes, after our dinner together a few weeks back we couldn't stop talking about you," Tom said to Ruby. Both women gave him quizzical looks. Roxanne returned the smile to her face. "What Tom means is that we had such a nice time. We kept mentioning how it would be nice to do it again soon." Tom nodded. "You all are so funny," Ruby laughed, having already drunk half a glass of her wine. Knowing they shouldn't look too eager, Roxanne took Tom's hand. Enjoy the food. I think you know some people over there. Roxanne pointed to a group of other real estate acquaintances Tom invited. What was that? Roxanne asked Tom after they were out of Ruby's earshot. It almost sounded like we want to form a throuple with her. I'm trying, Tom said stiffly. Try harder, Roxanne said and swept away to chat with some other guests. When Roxanne's father arrived, he hugged Roxanne, then spent most of his time drinking beer by the bar. She knew her dad might be disappointed she hadn't told him the news first, but she hadn't wanted the secret to slip out before she was ready. Their ability to pay off the loan shark hinged on being able to buy and develop Ruby's land. Tom had told Roxanne that when Ruby's parents died, they left her a large estate, including land her father had snatched up on the cheap before certain parts of Memphis had been developed. A secret provision in his will, however, stipulated that the land should only be sold to a man of good character, head of a solid family. Of course it was sexist, discriminatory even, but being an old-fashioned Southern belle who loved her father, Tom knew Ruby was looking for someone who fit the bill. As the party started hopping, Roxanne's nerves started to ease. Ruby, Roxanne said as she handed the heiress another glass of wine. This is my father. Roxanne's dad took Ruby's hand and kissed it. Ruby giggled. Nice to meet ya, she said. Roxanne's father put his arm around his daughter. Roxanne here didn't tell me she had such beautiful friends. Ruby smiled. Dad, that's weird, Roxanne said. How do you know each other? He asked. Oh, through Tom, Ruby said and Roxanne nodded. I didn't think Tom was such the friendly type, Roxanne's father said. We go way back, said Ruby. I'm so glad he met someone. I mean, he is such a lone wolf. Always mysterious and independent. Ruby smiled. Roxanne knew they had to change that perspective. Well, he's changed. He's an attached wolf now, Roxanne said. Tom hurried over, his halted steps showing his uncomfortable nature around so many people. He wrapped his arm around both Ruby and Roxanne's shoulders. How are my two favorite ladies? He said, hugging them to him. Roxanne looked a little uneasy. We were just telling Ruby how you're no longer so solitary, Roxanne said. That's right, not with my gals here. Roxanne tried to stop his awkward display. She could tell he was trying too hard to include Ruby in their circle. Tom took a glass and started clinking his fork against it, trying to get everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming, he said. Roxanne and I have a very important announcement, he continued. We're pregnant, they both said together. A person in the back of the room threw bundles of pink and blue streamers. A caterer placed a tiered cake in pink and blue, decorated with baby rattles onto the food table and started cutting slices. People smiled and toasted the couple. Tom and Roxanne grinned at each other and pecked on the lips. Wow, Roxanne, I don't know what to say. I thought you would have told your old dad first. I thought we were close.
I'm sorry, Dad.
I'll explain later, okay? It's complicated. I mean, a heads up would have been nice, he said and skulked away for another beer. I thought you were close? Ruby asked. I think my dad would have been the first person I told. Family is so important. Roxanne tried to hold on to her smile, feeling her cheeks starting to droop. She desperately wanted to hang on to the idea that she and Tom were the kind of family-friendly people Ruby's dad had mentioned in his will. I've been busy, said Roxanne, trying to defend herself. Ruby turned to Tom. You know who else is pregnant? And she continued to talk about old school chums as if they had never left the restaurant all those weeks ago. Roxanne, abandoned by her father, and left out of the conversation with Ruby, turned to find herself alone. A few of the community members who lived in the apartments above meandered by and congratulated her. Everyone seemed to be having a good time. Except Roxanne. She had been so focused on winning over Ruby, she lost sight of why she and Tom had struck a deal in the first place. Disappointing her father made Roxanne feel like the pregnancy was a bargaining chip, not the start of a happy family. She had only made the agreement with Tom in the first place in order to protect her father's safety, but she forgot to guard his heart and Chapter 28, Moonlight Moment. Later that night at Tom's, Roxanne changed into the sweats she called pajamas and sat on the couch next to him with a bowl of ice cream. When she finished eating and put the bowl down on the coffee table, Tom cringed. What? She said. Can you put that in the dishwasher or on a magazine? It's going to get the table dirty. Sorry, I'm not as fancy as you. She picked up the bowl and set it in the sink. It's not about being fancy, just, having manners. Oh, so I don't have manners? Roxanne blurted at him as she toddled back to the living room. That's not what I said. She could see Tom stiffen as he sat up a little straighter. It's just we're having a baby. We need to teach it things besides how to crack eggs with one hand. Hey, that's a useful skill, she protested and sank herself into a chair. Are you on edge about something? He asked, his face placid. Yeah, everything, she said, biting her lip and crossing her arms. I'm being chased by a loan shark. I was arrested, and now I'm carrying my mere baby and I'm hoping it all works out. Tom smiled. It made Roxanne even more tense. He didn't usually smile unless there was a good reason. Nothing she said had been funny, and unlike the first night at the bar, she didn't see any cats slinking around. I hate when you do that, she said. What? Why are you smiling? She asked. Because you didn't know what to call me. Yeah, I guess I've been too busy being kidnapped, handcuffed, and planning a party I didn't even think to ask. Her snarky response didn't even elicit a reaction from Tom. And then at the party you just left me. After Ruby called me out for not telling my dad first, you chose her over me, Roxanne continued. I chose to stick to the plan. Right, Roxanne pointed in midair. The plan. She shook her head. And you wonder why I didn't know what to call you. That's really the only reason I'm here, isn't it? I mean the baby, the plan. She stood up to walk away. Roxanne, Tom stood up too, his body unbending like a ruler. I thought that's what you wanted. I think Ruby will come around. I'm just trying to keep you safe. She looked at Tom and knew he probably meant what he said. But safe wasn't what she wanted right now. She wanted passion and romance, not manners and a plan that somehow she managed to keep bungling at every turn. Yeah, Tom. I know. Safe. But you know me, she shrugged. Sometimes I like a little fire. Tom stared at her. She wasn't even sure if he heard her. In their intimate moments together he applied just the right amount of gentleness to spice. But with their other problems piling on, Roxanne found it hard to deal with his lack of emotion. I need a breather, she said and turned toward the door. Take Blake, Tom called after her. Roxanne decided to start at the beginning. All her problems basically began with Baxter and the day the permit was stolen. After amassing several clues and seeing Baxter at both the building that was supposed to be for sale and during her arrest, she knew he was a key to everything that had been going wrong. Normally in those kinds of predicaments, Roxanne would head to the bar, talk to her father or maybe even Owen. With her dad upset at her and Owen dead, she didn't have anyone to be her sounding board. Blake drove her to her trailer on the construction site like she asked. Since construction had halted, she heard much of the crew had picked up some odd jobs in the meantime. She hoped they could get back on track once she figured out the truth. With Blake waiting in the SUV, she opened the trailer and turned on the lights. Everything seemed to be in order. She trickled her fingers along the file folder on her desk. She wasn't sure exactly what brought her there, but being back in her old office where she once felt confident and useful, made her long to get back to work. If only she'd never left that day, she thought. She could have thrown Baxter out instead of fleeing. Although for all she knew, someone might have tried to sabotage her another way. An almost full moon lit up the sky when Roxanne emerged. She indicated to Blake that she was going to walk down to the construction site. She missed the dust and the rumble of heavy machinery, along with the camaraderie she shared with the guys. She strode around the foundation, looking at the steel framing. Climbing onto the cab of a backhoe, she used it as a platform to jump onto a steel beam. Straddling it, she sat and watched the moon. She remembered when her father used to bring her to construction sites and she'd tiptoe along the beam like an Olympic gymnast. Being pregnant, she cautioned herself to sit still and enjoy the cool breeze in the air. She was glad Tom hadn't followed her because she needed a moment to herself. A moment without all the pressure. Underneath her, the building felt sturdy and strong. Perched on its ledge, she was like a bird on a wire, resting until it decided on its next destination. Sitting in the moonlight, she heard a distinctive purring sound. She searched below her amongst the beams and empty shell of a building to find its source. Then she spotted it, a black cat, nearly hidden in the shadows by the corner of the building. Roxanne's broad smile reached across her face as she remembered Tom watching the cat at the bar. Its fur looked soft and silky, hiding the sharp angles of its bones. She watched the cat stretch and arch its back, its tail pointed in the air. Tom wasn't a lone wolf like Ruby described, Roxanne reasoned. He was more like a lost cat, scared amongst the crowd, making careful movements until he found what he was looking for. Instead of scaring him off, she needed to coax him to her. She already knew he was willing to claw his way out of tough situations for her. If she wanted a real relationship with Tom, a solid family, she had to make him comfortable with her, while letting him do things his way at times. With her plan in place, Roxanne was confident she could tame him. Chapter 29, Truth-Telling. The next morning, Tom lightly knocked then peeked in on Roxanne, still asleep in the guest bedroom after her late night at the construction site. Seeing her resting peacefully, Tom decided not to wake her. He didn't want any more arguments. Instead, he intended to show Roxanne she could count on him. He thought about their awkward first meeting and how much had changed between them since then. The only way Tom knew the permit had been stolen was because he'd heard Roxanne cursing and rifling through her office that night. When she emerged all disheveled, the door squeaking, and she hadn't bothered with the lock, he suspected something was up. Then he asked her about the permit and the plans, and he could tell she was lying. After she left him that night, he called Danny. He didn't tell him what he knew, but instead asked about Roxanne, trying to figure out if someone had a beef with her. When he found out about her father's debt and the deal with the loan shark, Tom ruled the loan shark out as a suspect. He wouldn't jeopardize the building project. With an unknown thief on the loose, he trailed Roxanne the next morning, looking for more answers. The phone call he received was from an informant he paid in the city permit office, confirming Roxanne hadn't filed the permit. That's when Tom knew she was in trouble and would be a good candidate for his proposal. He hadn't expected to fall for her. So as not to wake Roxanne, Tom closed the doors to his study and called Roxanne's old boss, Danny. He needed some answers and decided to investigate the source, Baxter. If he agreed to the permit in the first place, why would he sabotage it? And the way Roxanne became distraught the night they saw him at the abandoned building, nagged at Tom. What had he done to her? Danny, hello, Tom said. Hey Tom. How are ya? You probably heard about the construction delay. What's up? Yeah, about that. I heard. You know that time I met Roxanne? You mentioned a city permit official, Baxter. Yeah, Baxter, Danny chuckled. He's a good old boy. Some of those other officials are a little more by the book, but Baxter can usually be persuaded. What do you mean by that? He can be bribed. Now, I didn't say that, I said persuaded. Well, he sounds like the guy I need. Where can I find him? He usually hangs out at the Pepper Pub down on Cooper St. But it's Sunday, so he's probably playing golf at the club at Sterling Ridge. Thank you, Danny. Tom hung up and considered his next move. Tom knew the club Danny mentioned. It was the country club Ruby belonged to along with a couple of other people Tom knew from high school. Tom donned his golf attire, a crisp white polo and black pants. If he didn't find Baxter, at least he could work on his long game. With Blake serving as caddy while another bodyguard stayed at the house to safeguard Roxanne, Tom teed off. He didn't worry too much about his shots, instead scanning the greens for Baxter. He had gotten a pretty good look at him in the binoculars that night, so he knew he was searching for a man in his 50s with graying brown hair and a full beard. Tom chipped and putted, sometimes skipping the initial drive altogether. Blake drove the golf cart as they circled around some holes twice, trying to gain a better look at some of the golfers, but there were no signs of Baxter. They returned to the clubhouse where Tom spotted Baxter with a group of his buddies at a table in the corner. Tom ordered a club soda and sat down at the bar, Blake sitting at the other end. Tom pretended to watch one of the games on the several TVs that hung around the room. He could hear Baxter's bellicose laughter as he called the waitress, a young girl in her early 20s, darlin'. Out of the mirror behind the bar, Tom could see Baxter's reflection, and he watched as the waitress returned and Baxter's eyes dipped to her chest and followed her backside after she'd left the table. Tom realized that must be what had made Roxanne so uncomfortable. Most likely Baxter had objectified her, or worse, Tom thought. Tom took a small sip of his drink. He needed more information about Baxter and his after-hours activities. Why had he been at that building that was supposed to be for sale? All Tom's people could find out was that the men had been forging some kind of aluminum in an old glass factory. Tom didn't have anyone look into it any further because he thought it was a dead end. Just some guys trying to use an empty building for a pet project. Plus, the building had been sold to an investor who planned to use it for commercial warehousing, and his investigators said the night crew hadn't returned. After talking to Danny about Baxter and seeing Baxter's cocky attitude, Tom figured Roxanne must be right. There was more to the mystery than a stolen permit. Well, said Ruby, sidling up to Tom at the bar. Fancy seeing you here. Tom turned his head abruptly, surprised to see Ruby at first, then remembering to smile and be amiable. Hello, Ruby. Won't you join me for a drink? A Chardonnay, please, he said to the bartender. You know me so well, she said and giggled. He smirked. He didn't want to have to put on a facade for Ruby right now. He was there on a mission, but he knew it was just as important to treat Ruby well. Where's Roxanne? She asked. She's at home. You know, morning sickness, Tom said, then squirmed a little due to his lie. He thought about how easily the lies rolled off his tongue lately. It's none of my business, Ruby started to say. Your business is my business, Tom said. He could still see Baxter in the mirror telling a loud joke, making sure he was the center of attention. Tom wanted to sneer, but he kept his face calm. But why aren't you guys engaged? I mean, you're having a baby. Tom faced Ruby. He realized he'd have to explain, which probably meant another lie, and he needed to concentrate to do it. You know, Roxanne and I are big into family, and I want to be that family man, pillar of the community and all that. Roxanne is just a little worried about losing her independence. Well, I noticed your parents weren't at the party, Ruby said. My parents and I, yeah. They've been really busy. Traveling. They're super excited about the baby though. Tom internally cringed at all the lies. He couldn't make it stop. He caught a glimpse of Baxter and winced. Tom couldn't believe how he and Roxanne had suffered with the kidnapping and the arrest, and watching Baxter have a good time with his pals maddened him. He turned toward Ruby again. Actually, Ruby, Roxanne and I haven't been together long. We just kind of, I don't know, we were helping each other out and well, he shrugged. You know, I don't have a great relationship with my parents. Tom felt relieved to be telling the truth. I've struck out on my own, like those shops and apartments. I wanted to make sure it had a community feel. I want to do more projects like that. Blend families with functional spaces. Ruby nodded. I see. But I do want kids. Tom smiled at a little girl in the restaurant who had whipped cream stuck to her nose. I want to be a better dad, not just one who pays for things. And Roxanne, she'll be the fiercest mother bear I know. She's quite resourceful. I bet she is. Ruby drained her glass. You know, I'm looking for someone to develop some of my father's land. We should talk about it soon, she said. I'd like that, Tom admitted, finally giving Ruby a genuine smile. Gotta go. Massage at noon. Toodles. She toddled off, giving Tom a little wave and a smile. Tom could still see Baxter's reflection in the mirror. He was tired of all the lies, all the slinking around. It was time to take matters into his own hand. Chapter 30, Baxter's Bluff. Tom hoisted himself off the bar stool and walked to the back of the room where Baxter and his cronies were busy laughing at the latest joke. When Baxter saw Tom approach their table with his tall and angular body, he stopped laughing. Can I help you?
I'm Tom.
Yeah, I know who you are. You're the kid of those real estate tycoons. Tom fumed inside. He wanted to be known for more than his association with his parents. Actually, I'm here about Roxanne. Oh, the hot construction manager who got arrested for forging my signature? That's not how I describe her, but yes. I hope you're not here to beg me to get her off the hook. I mean, I could help her, but she'd have to do the begging. He leaned back and laughed as his friends chuckled at his joke. Look, I know you signed that permit. Then something mysteriously happened to it. And I know about that abandoned glass factory. Baxter's eyes narrowed at Tom's mention of the factory. You're into something and I'm going to find out. You can help me now or it will get much worse later on. I don't know what this guy is talking about, Baxter said to his friends. She must be filling your head with lies. I never signed off on that permit. He rolled his eyes and shook his head. As for some factory, you must have the wrong guy. Tom had always been a gentleman, and this was no exception. Excuse me then, he said and marched away. Can you believe that guy? He heard Baxter say to his friends and laugh. Tom could tell that Baxter was just trying to play him, but he hoped he'd gotten into his head. When people were doing bad things, they often made mistakes when they learned someone was close to finding out their secret. Tom didn't want to hide in the dark anymore. He had called Baxter's bluff. Even though Roxanne knew she and Tom had to talk, she needed to reconcile with her father first. Heading over to his apartment in the afternoon, beads of sweat formed around her forehead due to the heat wave. A few weeks ago, she might have suggested meeting at the hole in the wall, but with Owen gone, the place had shuttered, at least temporarily, until his sister could find a buyer. She knocked on her father's door, and after a few moments, he opened it. Hey Pop, she said. Hey Roxy.
Come in.
He scuttled over to the couch where a beer rested on the coffee table. I'd offer you a beer, but... He pointed to her stomach. Look, Dad. I know I should have told you. It was just... She plopped down next to him on the sofa. The thing is, you knew I'd be happy for ya. I'm going to be a grandpa. He smiled. And I don't even care that you're not married. Roxanne rolled her eyes and turned toward him. Dad, I know. It's just all a little sudden, and scary. Roxy, you've been looking after me all these years. It's time you forgot about me anyway, and think about your future. Dad, I didn't forget you. I did this for you. He looked at her confused. I know I said I wanted to be a grandpa, but what do you mean? It's this deal Tom and I made. I mean, kind of. He wanted to help with the loan shark, but I wouldn't let him. And then, well, let's just say a lot has happened. And I used to be the person you told when it did. Her dad looked disappointed. I'll tell you things, Pop. Promise. I was just protecting you. Well, stop. He reached around her for a hug. She rested her head against his chest. She started to cry. I'm in too deep, Pop. I got arrested and then Tom took the blame. We need to buy Ruby's land and I don't know. Sure, he said, holding her harder. It's going to be all right. You don't have to tell me all now. I can see those hormones are getting to you. He laughed a little. What if I'm like Mom? She asked, wiping her eyes and looking at her father. You're not in the way you mean. You're strong and loyal and determined, said her dad. I haven't quite made up my mind about Tom yet, but I sense he's going to protect you. Roxanne nodded. He will. They stayed like that for a few minutes, embracing. Roxanne remembered how they all became embroiled in the mess in the first place. Her first priority had been to protect her father. She couldn't forget that. Despite her feelings about Tom, Ruby, and their deal, she needed to work through it for her father's sake. Her dad clicked on the TV. One of their favorite old movies was playing, and they sat nestled together watching the flick, Roxanne eventually spending the night. When Tom returned home, he couldn't find Roxanne. He wanted to tell her about his talk with Ruby, and how he confronted Baxter. After he searched the rooms and looked at the 5 unanswered texts on his phone, he asked Blake to find out what happened. Blake confirmed Roxanne was safe at her father's apartment, and Tom, visibly relieved, wilted into the couch. It had been a long 24 hours stemming from his tension with Roxanne. He was surprised by how much she had changed him and couldn't quite believe he had ever proposed raising a baby alone. He wanted to prove how much he cared for her, not just because of their deal or the baby, but how deeply he felt about her. He remembered one of the things she mentioned, how sometimes she wanted fire. If it was fire and passion she wanted, he'd give it to her. He called an associate on the phone. You know that deal I was working on? Yes, buy it. I'll sign the papers in the morning. Chapter 31, Fire in the Hole. Tom worked feverishly to put together a special surprise for Roxanne the next evening, while she spent the day with her father. He texted her to meet him at the hole in the wall around 8. Roxanne, unsure what Tom had been planning, couldn't fathom why Tom would invite her to her old hangout, a place that made him so uncomfortable. It had been shuttered for weeks, waiting for a new owner. She felt strange walking up to the empty bar that held so many good memories for her. She knocked on the door and moments later Tom opened it, exposing the first part of his surprise. Inside, hundreds of candles on the empty tables lit up the bar. The flickering lights made the room sparkle, providing a romantic ambience. Wow, said Roxanne. I've never seen the hole in the wall look so dazzling, she said. You said you wanted fire. Tom gestured his arms out to all the candles spread throughout the room. Yeah, Roxanne laughed. I guess I did. He stepped over to the bar and pressed a button or two on his phone to play a slow song. Want to dance? He asked. I didn't think you would be the dancing type. Roxanne looked at him, a sly smile forming on her lips. I'm not good, but I once attended a cotillion. He walked back and placed his arms around her in a dancing frame. His feet started to move, flopping a bit but otherwise completing the steps. Roxanne smiled. Their bodies swayed together with the music. I want you to know how much you mean to me, Tom said. It's not all about the plan and business. I know, Roxanne said, still swaying her hips with Tom's. I'm sorry. I can't force you to change who you are. It's just strange how this all came about. She looked down at her stomach. And I don't always know how to handle it. He hugged her closer, her head resting on his chest. Well, you're safe with me. She closed her eyes for a moment, enjoying the feeling of warmth she drew from Tom's body. How did you get in here anyway? She asked, her head still relaxing on Tom. I bought the place, he said without missing a step. Roxanne stepped away and looked at Tom. Her sudden and abrupt movement surprised Tom. Tom, you can't just buy my affection. I know, I thought you'd be happy. Happy? I'm just shocked. I thought you didn't like this place, you know, people and all. It's not like I have to be here all the time. We can hire someone to run it. I already thought about it. We can hire any of the staff who worked for Owen if they want to come back. And for the open positions, I think I know some residents who live above the coffee shop that could use some extra hours. I just don't want the vibe of this place to change. We're so different. How can we make this work? She looked around as if viewing the bar in a new way. Don't change a thing, Tom said. Well, I always hated that pink color in the hallway. She pointed towards the bathroom, wrinkling her nose. Tom grinned. That's my girl. Actually, there are a few construction projects I can handle around here. She put her hands on her hips, scanning the venue. It'll still remain a place where construction workers and firemen and businessmen can all mingle and grab a beer. She nodded. She looked at the pool table. And we can have a pool tournament, she said. No gambling, just an entry fee. Tom nodded. Now you're talking. Oh, Tom. I can't believe you bought a bar. She flashed a huge smile and ran into Tom's arms, hugging him tightly. He hugged her back, then broke their embrace to temper her excitement. Owen wasn't making much from it. If we hire someone to manage it, we'll just about break even. But I bought it for you. You've had so many big changes in your life. And this baby will be the biggest change of all. I want you to have a place where you feel comfortable. Are you sure you didn't just do this so my dad would like you more? Roxanne asked. Tom smiled and shook his head a little. She stepped in closer and kissed him. It's kind of weird when it's empty, she said. I've always kind of wanted to dance on top of the bar. She looked at him with a naughty grin. He pressed a button on his phone to play a sultry dance song. Roxanne climbed up and started moving her hips. She shook her body seductively, twisting with the music. Then she reached down for Tom, inviting him to join her on the bar. He held her hips close to his and they rocked back and forth. When the song was over, Tom hopped down and helped Roxanne off the bar. He caught her as she fell into his arms, and he kissed her fervently on the lips. She pulled him down behind the bar and straddled him, not wasting any time unzipping his pants. She smashed her lips into his. Their kisses were feverish and sloppy. Roxanne sat up and removed her shirt, unsnapped her bra, and let it fall to the floor. Sitting on top of Tom's legs, she looked down into his eyes as he fondled her breasts. She pulled down his pants along with her own and mounted him. With the music still playing, Roxanne moved her hips as Tom lay back enjoying the ride. Afterwards, she fell onto him. Their naked bodies joined together on the cool bar room floor. She couldn't believe Tom bought the hole in the wall for her, and she couldn't wait to tell her dad that his old watering hole would soon be back in business. They dressed, and Tom pulled 2 chairs up to a table near the bar. He poured them each a soda, brought them over, and sat down looking a little nervous. Now that the fun is over, I have something to tell you, he said, and Roxanne did not like the worried look on his face. Chapter 32. Lightbulb moment. She took his hand. They'd been through so much, Roxanne was sure she could handle what he had to tell her. I confronted Baxter. You what? She asked, widening her eyes. I meant to just watch him, try to figure out what he's up to, Tom said, not meeting her gaze. Tom, he's in on it, I know. I saw him that day we got arrested. He was standing outside by his car. By my house. Yeah, it was weird. How did he know? Tom cocked his head. His body stayed still, but Roxanne could tell his mind was racing. I don't know, but I don't like how he treats people. I saw how he was with this waitress and it was... Tom's face tightened, and he clenched his fist a little. You don't have to tell me, but I know something happened that day I met you. Roxanne's eyes started to water with the memory. I'm not going to let him hurt you. I told him we're on to him, Tom said through clenched teeth. But we have nothing. Roxanne held out her hands, her voice cracking a bit. We know nothing. He's going to make a mistake, Roxanne, and we're going to catch him. Tom looked into the far corner of the room. I don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out. I mean, he must have known the permit was stolen. That's the only explanation for why he was there for the arrest. Roxanne patted Tom's hand. She made eye contact with him and gave him a consoling smile. Thanks for standing up for me. I'm sorry I got mad about Ruby. I'll do whatever you need to get that land for your development deal. Tom bent his head and peered up at Roxanne. That's the other thing I have to tell you. What? I told Ruby the truth. Roxanne let go of Tom's hand and held her hands to her mouth in shock. What do you mean? I didn't expect to run into her, but then I did, and you know how bad I am with people. Tom shook his head, still looking stressed, the veins on his forehead popping out a little. Anyway, I couldn't do anything but lie to her. One lie after another. They were starting to taste so sour. I couldn't spit another one out. So I told her the truth, some of it. He held up his hand to show he'd stopped at some point. And how'd she take it? Surprisingly well, maybe. I don't know. She wants to talk about her father's land soon. That's a good sign, I guess. Roxanne nodded, trying to get Tom to feel hopeful too. Tom leaned back in the chair. Squeaked a little. He did it again, testing the chair to see if it was broken. Just needs a little tightening, Roxanne said. Owen used to keep a tool kit under the bar. Tom stepped over to the bar, found the toolbox and returned to the table. He pulled out a screwdriver and started to tighten the screw. It wouldn't turn. Here. Roxanne said, grabbing a different screwdriver. You need a bigger one, and she started to turn the screw, Tom still kneeling down to watch her. When she was finished, Tom sat back in the chair. I guess you'll be the resident handyman at the bar, he said. Yeah, there's a nail loose at the end of the bar. That's been driving me crazy for some time. She took a hammer, found the area under the bar, and hit the nail into place. You know how sexy you look right now with your tools? Tom said. Roxanne sniggered. Your turn. There has to be something you can fix here. Roxanne looked around. Ah! She pointed at one of the light fixtures with a dead light bulb. You're tall. Looks like that one's for you. Tom stood on a chair while Roxanne fetched the bulb she knew Owen kept in a backroom closet. She handed it to Tom. When he screwed it in, the light bulb flickered and shocked Tom's hand. He jumped back, almost falling off the chair. Roxanne laughed. Yeah, we should have turned the switch off first. You really need some lessons. He stepped down to her. I guess it's harder than it looks. He wrapped his arm around her. They both looked around at the bar. You know, we'll have to give my dad a job. He can't stay on his feet all day, but something to keep him busy would be nice. Supply manager? Tom asked. Sounds good. And if we ever need a building permit, I'll handle it. Tom pushed a strand of hair away from Roxanne's face. That's it. Roxanne snapped her fingers. If Baxter's up to something and we know he is, we can look at who he signed permits for. Maybe we'll uncover something fishy. Easy enough. Most of that information's public anyway. I'll get someone on it, Tom said and stepped aside with his phone. A few days later, after some digging, and probably a bribe or two, Tom's informant found out Baxter had signed a building permit for a fake corporation on the east side of town. They were redesigning an old warehouse, but it wasn't clear why. When Tom's investigator couldn't find a license for the company supposedly involved, he knew it must be a fake. Tom and Roxanne drove by the building site on a cloudy day, the threat of rain hanging low in the air. They could see men from the construction crew coming in and out of the building with various supplies. Based on the items and tools they were gathering, Roxanne surmised they were working on reframing some areas of the building. When one of the workers drove off in a pickup truck, Tom and Roxanne followed. Baxter's got to be in on it. A fake corporation, and he didn't realize it. Roxanne questioned. I don't recognize anyone from that crew. It's possible they hired some guys from outside Memphis. Tom nodded. They continued to follow the truck until it stopped near a field across from a lumber supply store. A few men in jeans and work boots sat around, some eating snacks, others just talking with each other. The worker in the truck they were following pulled up and talked to one of the men. Then the group climbed into the back of the pickup and it pulled away. They're hiring some extra hands, Roxanne said. They followed the truck back to the building where the men hopped out and were handed various tools as they walked in. Put on your hard hat, Tom, you're joining the construction crew, Roxanne.
Chapitre 33, Construction-Destruction.
In Tom's garage later that night, Roxanne handed Tom a hard hat. Put this on, she said. They had just picked up some supplies from her father's place. With Tom's help, she set up a 2x4 on 2 sawhorses, and Roxanne handed Tom a hammer. Let's see what you've got, she said. Tom bent over the board, placed a nail on the piece of wood, and raised the hammer. As he smacked down on the nail, his arm jerked. He went through the same motions again, his arm looking like the hammer weighed as much as a brick. Here, Roxanne said, holding his hand with the hammer in her own. She swung down on the nail in a more fluid motion, tapping the nail head more lightly. Keep it fluid. Tom groaned. She let go. Tom tried again, hitting the nail on its side and bending it. Start again, Roxanne said, handing him another nail. He struck it, missing and hitting his thumb. Ow, ow, Tom whined. Roxanne came over and rubbed his thumb. Why can't I do this? Center the nail. Take a deep breath and use one flowing movement. You don't need to hit so hard. Let the hammer glide in your hand, she said, demonstrating the movement to Tom. He took her instructions and tapped the nail in with a few smaller hits. That's better, Roxanne said. I think you're ready for the nail gun. She showed Tom the safety features of the tool, then handed it to him. He jerked as each nail drilled into the wood piece. Slow and steady, she said. He adapted and worked down to the end of the board. After Roxanne showed him a couple more techniques and tools, she declared Tom ready for work. This plan isn't going to work. Tom kicked a piece of trash with his shoe. They're going to know. Hey, she rubbed his shoulder. Just stand there and look the part. Whatever they're doing, they're going to need some help carrying things or cleaning up. Then you can go around and listen to what the other guys are saying. The next morning, donning jeans and a plaid shirt, Tom still looked too clean to be a construction worker. When he opened the garage, Roxanne grabbed some dirt from the yard and smeared it on his pants. "What?" Tom said, jumping back. "What are you doing? We need to rough you up a bit." Tom sighed and let Roxanne dirty his jeans and shirt. She stepped back to look at her handiwork and nodded her approval. Going undercover meant Tom couldn't bring a bodyguard, and now that the loan shark had agreed to their new deal, he felt safe for the time being. The challenge of infiltrating the construction crew centered around keeping his real identity hidden. If they realized he was there only for information, they might take matters into their own hands. Roxanne drove Tom's pickup and dropped him off in the open field where Tom sat down with a soda. Only 4 other men hung around, one eating a sandwich. Tom kept his head down, hoping not to draw any attention to himself. When the same pickup they'd followed the day before arrived, he waited for the crew leader to signal for the men to hop in the truck. As the other men scrambled into the truck, Tom clambered in too. He sat with his head down in the truck bed. One of the men nodded in his direction, and Tom took that as a kind of friendly recognition. Tom's palms were sweaty. He knew nothing about construction, and if someone realized that, these men certainly looked like the type who could kick the CRP out of him. He planned to stay silent or only speak when he had to. Like Roxanne instructed, he aimed to be more of a helper to the other crew members so no one would notice his lack of skills. The truck pulled up to the building, and all the men popped out and started grabbing tools. They seemed to know what they were doing. Tom grabbed a hammer, a hard hat, and some safety glasses. When he walked in the building, men were busy putting up some drywall in one area and sanding some wood beams in another. Tom followed the men from the truck toward a tall, overweight man with a mustache. "All right, I need you to frame out this office. It's going to go here." He pointed to an area of the room with mark spray painted on the floor. Tom examined the room. Various workers were completing jobs in the large, mostly empty building. Knowing that if he was caught, it could prove dangerous for him, Tom kept his gaze low so as not to reveal too much of his face and tried to blend in with the crew. The men started carrying in 2x4s from a pile in another part of the building. Tom followed and stilted toward the room, carrying a long piece of wood on his shoulder. Easy enough, Tom thought. The men assembled the planks and one started using the nail gun to connect them. Tom hammered in a nail or two with his hammer, taking his time to line everything up correctly, remembering what Roxanne had taught him. He'd been around construction sites before, but actually doing the work proved harder than he thought. He considered how impressive it was that such a beautiful woman like Roxanne could excel at such work. When the mustached boss returned, he instructed the crew to install some drywall. Tom trailed the men to a spot where supplies were stored. He picked up a large piece of drywall and hoisted it onto his shoulder, much like the other men were doing. Carrying back the drywall, Tom tried to look around. He didn't see anything amiss. His concern that his plan would prove useless worried Tom. The crew worked quickly, one man applying glue to the stud beams, the others placing the drywall and then using nail guns to attach the drywall to the beams. Tom tried to look useful, fumbling with some nails to the side, his palms sweating in fear that someone might ask him to complete a task he had no idea how to do. When the boss returned, he said to the group of them, "Now glass." They looked at him with a questioning stare. "Baxter wants it that way," the man said. At the mention of Baxter, Tom's ears perked up. So he and Roxanne were right, Baxter had something to do with the project. While the other men each carried their piece of glass between 2 men, feeling more confident in his abilities, Tom decided he could handle it on his own. Like the drywall, he picked up a large piece of glass and braced it on his shoulder. He trudged toward the room where they had been working. Before he arrived there, however, another construction worker passed Tom coming the other way with a heavy tool. Tom tried to step out of the way to let the man pass, but he didn't realize a large table saw sat behind him. Tom bumped into it. His body turned instead of absorbing the blow, and the piece of glass swept into the saw and shattered. The sound of cracking glass caught everyone's attention. The surprise shock of the broken glass paralyzed Tom. He stopped and stood like a stage actor caught in the spotlight.